The cable snapped like a gunshot. That's the sound I'll never forget. Not the scream. There was no scream. Just that sharp, metallic crack that echoes through your chest and stops your heart for a full second. Then the groan. A deep, mechanical death rattle as $12 million of steel folded in half and sank into Baltimore Harbor. I was standing on the dock when it happened. My crew was with me. We'd already walked. That's the point everyone misses when they ask me about that day. We'd already walked away. My name is Marcus Novak, and I've been a certified rigger and crane safety officer for 19 years. That's not bragging, it's background. Because everything that followed, every single thing that happened that morning, hinged on the fact that I knew exactly what I was talking about. And the person who was supposed to listen to me? He didn't. Let me take you back to the week before. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and social media cross big town before it develops. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the different ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative, and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town. Container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started, and let the divert ships a few too. Baltimore's a serious port town, container ships, break bulk, likers, considerative and more started. The Liebherr was a workhorse, a 300-ton capacity mobile crane, tracked base, hydraulic boom. Built in 1998 but meticulously maintained. We used it for everything. But the second Vince said 280, something in my head did the math automatically. A 300-ton crane can handle 300 tons under ideal conditions, which almost never exist in real-world loading. Environmental factors, boom angle, load angle, weather conditions, wear on the equipment. You typically have to work with 80 to 85% of rated capacity for safety margin. That's industry standard. That's OSHA standard. 280 tons on a 300-ton crane isn't cutting it close. It's catastrophically close. Confirm the weight? I asked. That's what the manifesto says. We're sending someone to verify at the yard, but you know how these things go. Usually documents are accurate. I felt that first itch. The one that never goes away if you've seen what happens when equipment fails. I've been on 3 sites where cranes have failed. None of them were small. The first time was in 2009, a 4-ton load that fell 30 feet and crushed a forklift. The driver walked away, but not really. We didn't see him again. He left the industry altogether, and I remember thinking that he just couldn't unsee what he'd seen. The second time was worse, 2015, Charleston. A 50-ton load shifted on a barge. The rigging failed. Nobody died, but a guy named Terrence lost his arm from the elbow down. I was there. I remember the sound, wet and terrible and final. Worse than the Liebherr. The third time was educational. 2018, we were moving a bridge section in Philadelphia. 220 tons. The calculation was a hair above safe limits. I flagged it. The supervisor at that job, a man named Derek Hollis, actually listened to me. We waited 2 days, got a bigger crane, and moved that section without incident. That's what happens when people listen. That's what the system is supposed to do when someone trained says stop. Friday came around. I got to the site early, 6:15 in the morning. The harbor was gray, kind of dead-looking, with that particular smell of salt water and diesel that never quite leaves your clothes no matter how many times you wash them. The Liebherr was already positioned on the dock, boom extended, rigging team assembling the spreader bars. 4 guys I knew, Tommy, Jerome, Dallas, and a newer guy named Scott who'd been with us for about 8 months. The truck arrived around 6:45. Flatbed, oversized load, escort vehicles. The die assembly was exactly what we expected. Massive industrial tooling, the kind of thing that cost companies millions to replace if anything happened to it. But here's the thing nobody in management seems to understand. A load isn't just about its weight. It's about its center of gravity, its geometry, its center of lift. This particular assembly was wider than it was tall, which meant the center of gravity wasn't where the paperwork said it was. The weight distribution was off. Mathematically, provably off. I walked over to Tommy, who was our senior hookman that day. Get that manifest in the load chart, I told him. I want exact measurements and center of gravity calculations before we hook anything. Tommy's been doing this as long as I have. He just nodded. He already knew what I was asking for and why I was asking for it. By 7:30, we had the numbers, and they were worse than I'd thought. 285 tons. Not 280, 285. The load's center of gravity was 14 inches forward of where the paperwork claimed it would be. That meant the rigging load wasn't distributed evenly across the boom. It meant we were looking at a 40-ton overload on the front half of the spreader bar. The Liebherr's rated capacity was 300 tons under perfect conditions. We were going to be operating at 95% capacity with a center of gravity problem. That's not a safety margin. That's a countdown timer with the numbers ticking backward. I called the office, asked for our shift supervisor, Derek Massey. Derek's not a bad guy. That's the thing people always want to know afterward. Was he reckless? Was he stupid? No. He was under pressure. The logistics company had paid a premium for Friday delivery. The customer was paying for quick turnaround. The Port Authority had scheduled our window. Everyone up the chain was expecting this lift to happen that morning. Derek had been promised a bonus if the week went smooth. I understood that. I understood the pressure. I just couldn't let it matter more than I did. We've got a problem with the load calculation, I told him over the phone. What kind of problem? The actual weight is 285 tons, not 280. And the center of gravity is 14 inches forward. That throws off the rigging load distribution. We're going to be in an unsafe configuration. I heard him exhale. Not angry exhale, tired exhale. The sound of a man realizing that something he'd already committed to was becoming complicated. Marcus, are you sure? I'm sure. Can we offset it? Use a different rigging arrangement? Maybe, but we'd still be at 95% capacity, and that's assuming ideal conditions. There's a stiff wind coming in from the northeast. The barometer's dropping. We might see rain by noon. None of that's ideal. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, calculating, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. "Let me make some calls," Derek said. "Stay put. Don't do anything until I call you back." He called back exactly 19 minutes later. I remember checking the time. 19 minutes. That's how long it took for corporate pressure to override professional judgment. "We're going ahead with it," he said. "The customer's already paid. The window closes at 5 today. They're not bringing another crane and we're not pushing this to Monday. We need to make this work, Marcus. I need you to find a way to make this work." That's the moment. Right there. That's when everything crystallizes. I've trained a lot of younger riggers, and one of the first things I always tell them is simple. Your job isn't to make management happy. Your job is to keep people alive. If those two things ever come into conflict, people get to live. Everything else is secondary. Everything. "I can't do it, Derek," I said quietly. "I can't make this work safely." "You're a safety officer, Marcus. Your job is to find solutions. My job is to prevent accidents, and this is an accident waiting to happen." Another pause. This one felt longer. I could feel the weight of it, the moment where a supervisor realizes that someone under him isn't going to bend. "Get back to the dock and make it work," Derek said, and he hung up. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, phone in my hand, looking out at the harbor. The wind was picking up. I could see the Liebherr's boom shifting slightly. Nothing dramatic, just that subtle sway they all have when there's wind and exposed surface area. The boom was swaying in the wind like it was trying to warn me, like it was already tired. I thought about Terrence and his missing arm. I thought about that driver who walked away in 2009 and never came back. I thought about the weight of liability, of paperwork, of lawsuits, of the families of people who die in industrial accidents. I thought about the letters they send, the ones that detail what happened, how it happened, why their husband or son or father isn't coming home. Then I thought about my crew, Tommy, Jerome, Dallas, and Scott. Good men, skilled men, men with families and mortgages and kids. Scott had just told me his wife was pregnant. He was going to be a father. And I was being asked to gamble with his life on the off chance that some manager in an office somewhere had correctly calculated acceptable risk. I drove back to the dock. It was already 7:55. The sun wasn't quite up yet, that weird pre-dawn gray that makes everything look hostile and sharp, like the world hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. Derek was waiting for me. He was a big guy, early 50s, ex-military bearing, the kind of supervisor who earned respect through consistency. But that morning, he was angry. Not yelling angry. Colder than that. Desperate angry. "You're going to supervise this lift personally," he said. "I don't care what your concerns are. We're moving this load. Today. Now." "Derek." "Now, Marcus." I looked at him. I looked out at the dock. My crew was standing there, watching. They could read the situation. They knew there was a problem. They could sense it the way animals sense storms coming. You don't need to be told when something is wrong. You feel it. "I can't do it," I said. And Derek's face, I remember his face very clearly, shifted. The anger moved into something else. Something like panic mixed with pure management-level desperation. It was the face of a man realizing that his authority wasn't going to matter. "If you walk away from this job," he said, "I'll write you up. This is insubordination. This is grounds for termination." "Then terminate me," I said. "But I'm not supervising an unsafe load being lifted over a crowded harbor." "You know what? Fine. I'll do it myself. Get your crew together and get them ready to—" "No," I said. "My crew is leaving. All of them. We're formally pulling from this operation. I'm documenting this decision. I'm filing a safety incident report with OSHA, and I'm doing it right now." Derek stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. Maybe in a way I had. The language of refusing to play the game. "You're serious?" "I'm dead serious." He took a step closer. "You understand what you're doing here? You understand the financial implications? You understand that Chesapeake Marine is going to come after you?" "I understand," I said. "I also understand that if that load drops, someone dies. probably multiple someones. And I'm not carrying that. Not today, not for money, not for a job, not for anything. I turned and walked back toward my crew. Derek followed me. Marcus, come on. We can use different rigging, We can't, I said, and you know it. You just don't want to admit it to the people upstairs. I called everyone together. Took maybe 90 seconds for the four of them to gather around. 90 seconds for my entire professional future to potentially collapse. Formal pullback from this operation, I said. Safety concern, overweight load, inadequate rigging configuration, adverse weather conditions. We're done. Pack up your personal gear and let's go. Marcus, Tommy started. I'm documenting everything. You're covered. Legal's going to back this up. But we're leaving right now. Jerome didn't ask questions. Jerome's older. He's 61. Been in the industry longer than I have. He just nodded and started walking. Dallas and Scott followed. Tommy grabbed his thermos and harness bag and looked back at Derek one last time with the kind of expression that says everything about solidarity and respect. Can't say I blame him, Tommy said quietly, loud enough for Derek to hear. Then he walked away too. The four of us stood at the edge of the loading dock with our gear. Derek was still there, watching us, his face going through emotions I could read like subtitles. Anger, fear, calculation, desperation, and finally something like the beginning of understanding. This is going to haunt you, he said finally. Yeah, I agreed. But not as much as it'll haunt everyone else if something goes wrong. We stood there, waiting, because neither of us left. We weren't going anywhere. My crew and I just stayed. Stayed on the dock, stayed visible, stayed witnessed. We didn't turn away from what we'd started. The crane operator was a guy named Sean Kilmer. 32, good reputation, 16 years operating. He came over to me while Derek was standing there, while everything was frozen in this weird moment between compliance and disaster. The moment where the future hadn't been decided yet. What's happening? Sean asked me. I pulled the crew, I said. Load's overweight, center of gravity's off, conditions aren't safe. Derek's going ahead anyway. Sean looked at the rigging, looked at the Liebherr, looked at Derek, looked back at me. You're serious? I'm serious. Sean nodded slowly. He was doing the calculations I'd already done, the risk assessment, the actuarial math of human safety. Then I'm shutting down the crane, he said. I'm not operating equipment that's been flagged for safety concerns, not doing it. That was the moment Derek's world shifted. Because now it wasn't just the senior safety officer refusing. Now it was the crane operator, the most critical person in the entire operation. The irreplaceable person. Derek's face went pale, actually pale, like all the blood decided it had somewhere else to be. Like his body was responding to the disaster that was now inevitable. Sean, come on. No, sir, Sean said. I've got a daughter. I'm not moving a load that Marcus says is unsafe. End of discussion. Derek stood there. The dock was quiet except for the sound of water lapping against the pilings and the diesel rumble of container ships somewhere in the background. The sun was just coming up, painting everything in that harsh Baltimore morning light. And Derek Massey, shift supervisor, company man, guy just trying to keep his job and earn his bonus, realized that he was completely out of options. The machine had stopped. The system had said no. He pulled out his phone. I don't know if he called corporate, I don't know if he called the customer, I don't know if he called his wife and told her what was about to happen to their lives. I only know he turned away and walked about 30 feet down the dock, phone to his ear, shoulders tensing with every word he spoke. My crew and I stood there. We stood there for what felt like a very long time, though it was probably only about 5 minutes. Tommy was smoking. Jerome was sitting on an equipment case, his face unreadable but his presence unmoved. Dallas was checking his phone, but his shoulders were straight. Scott was staring at the Liebherr, at the load, at the rigging we'd carefully assembled but would never use. The rigging that was designed to fail under the weight it was about to bear. Then Derek came back. You're both off the job, he said, looking at me and Sean. As of right now, you're suspended pending investigation. Your crew is reassigned. Someone else will operate the crane and supervise the lift. That's your decision to make, I said. Derek walked away, and my crew and I watched, because we stayed. That's the thing nobody ever understands about moments like this. We didn't just walk away and go get coffee and pretend it was someone else's problem. We stayed, we watched, we witnessed, we held the line. It took about 20 minutes for a replacement crew to assemble. A guy named Robert Chavez came over with a new rigging team. Guys I didn't know as well, younger guys, eager to stay on Derek's good side. Robert was a solid rigger, probably the best alternative they could have pulled on short notice. But he didn't know what I knew. He didn't know the load specs. He didn't know the center of gravity problem. He was walking into a disaster blind. "Load's overweight," I called out to him. I wasn't trying to undermine the operation. I was just being clear. Being witnessed, being clear. Making sure that when the failure happened, there would be no question about whether the warning was given. Robert looked at me. "How overweight?" 285 tons. Manifesto said 280, but actual weight is 285. Center of gravity is 14 inches forward of documented. You're going to have rigging load imbalance. Robert glanced at the Liebherr, at the boom, at the load. I could see him doing the same calculations I'd done, the math that doesn't lie. "That's not ideal," he said. "No, it's not." He nodded. "Appreciate you letting me know, but we've got a timeline here." "I know," I said. "I just want to be clear that I raised the concern and Derek overrode it." "Yeah," Robert said, "I got that." He knew. He understood exactly what he was being asked to do and what the consequences might be. That was it. Robert went back to his team. They tightened the rigging a little bit more, trying to compensate, trying to make it work anyway, trying to solve an unsolvable problem through sheer effort and hope. Derek stood off to the side, watching, his phone in his hand, probably documenting his own ass coverage in case something went wrong, probably composing the emails he'd need to send to protect himself when the disaster came. My crew and I waited. 8:30 in the morning. The sun was up fully now. The harbor was picking up activity, other operations, other crews, other perfectly normal work happening all around us, unaware of what was about to happen. The world just kept spinning. And then, at 8:40, Sean, at Derek's override, started the crane. The Liebherr's hydraulics engaged with that deep mechanical groan, the signature sound of massive equipment bearing stress. The boom began to rise. The load lifted smoothly off the ground, and for just a second, I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe the load was fine and I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd miscalculated. Maybe... The cable on the right side of the spreader bar twitched. Not dramatically, just a twitch. A micro movement that said something was wrong with the weight distribution. The load wasn't balanced. The rigging was compensating, trying to distribute forces that didn't want to be distributed. The metal was already telling us what was going to happen. I could see it. Tommy could see it. Jerome could definitely see it. We all felt it in our bones, that deep animal recognition that something fundamental was about to go catastrophically wrong. The universe was about to remind us that we are very small and physics is very large. "No," I said quietly. The load lifted another foot. The boom climbed. And then the sound changed. It wasn't loud. That's what surprises people. They think there's dramatic noise, warnings, screaming. There wasn't. There was just a sound like deep groaning, like the earth itself was complaining, like something very heavy was asking very politely to be put down. The cable on the right side of the spreader bar didn't snap. It bent. The geometry of the load shifted, that wide, unwieldy automotive die assembly suddenly understanding that it wasn't balanced, that gravity was about to take over, that physics doesn't care about timelines or bonuses or management decisions or human intentions. The boom creaked, a real, terrible sound. Metal under stress. 285 tons of load trying to swing on rigging that was designed for a perfectly balanced distribution. The front of the spreader bar dipped, just slightly, just enough to change the angle of everything, just enough to tip the balance from barely holding to catastrophic failure. Then the cable snapped. Not the way I'd imagined it. I thought there would be that gunshot sound. There was, but it was deeper than that, more like a cannon firing from inside the earth. A sound that you don't just hear but feel in your spine. The right side of the spreader bar dropped freely, and the load, all of that massive, perfectly engineered automotive tooling, tilted. For maybe 2 seconds, everything was silent again. The load tilted there, suspended on the left side, hanging at an angle that no load was ever meant to hang at. And then the left cable failed in sympathy. The metal screamed. Not figuratively. The metal literally screamed as the rigging tore. It was a sound like a scream, like the machine itself was dying. The load fell. It hit the harbor water maybe 40 feet from the dock. The impact was enormous. A plume of seawater erupted like a bomb had detonated, and the sound, Jesus, the sound, echoed across the entire waterfront. It was louder than I expected, more violent, more final. Other operations stopped. Container handlers fell silent. The whole port watched a $12 million piece of equipment sink into Baltimore Harbor in about 8 seconds. In 8 seconds, a company's investment, a customer's job, Derek's career, and the trajectory of everyone on that dock changed forever. The water closed over it. The ripples spread out in concentric circles, moving outward like a wound healing in reverse. The Liebherr's boom swung wildly, freed of the weight, the spreader bar still attached to useless cable. Sean shut down the crane immediately. The machine went silent except for the idling engine and the sound of water settling. The sound of finality. For a full 5 seconds, nobody moved. Then chaos. Pure operational chaos. Somebody screamed. Alarms started going off. Derek was standing maybe 20 feet from me, and his face, I can still see his face, went absolutely white. Not like he was shocked, like he'd just understood his entire life was about to change. Like he'd made a choice and was seeing the consequences materialize in real time. The dock erupted into activity. Emergency protocols engaged. Someone was calling the port authority. Someone was calling the customer. Someone was calling the insurance company. Robert Chavez was standing in the middle of all of it, looking at the water where the load had been, and his face was showing something between disbelief and the beginning of understanding that he was about to be blamed for something that wasn't his fault. I looked at Tommy. He was staring at the water. Jerome was shaking his head slowly like he was trying to unsee what he'd seen. Dallas had his hand on Scott's shoulder. Scott was pale, looking like he might be sick. "That," I said quietly, "is why we walked away." The next few hours were a blur. Port Authority showed up within 20 minutes. Coast Guard showed up. Insurance adjusters showed up. State police showed up. They took statements from everyone. They asked me specifically what I'd known and when I'd known it. They wanted to understand the timeline, the decision points, the moment where something preventable became something inevitable. I told them everything. The weight discrepancy discovered at 7:30. The center of gravity offset calculated and confirmed. The unsafe rigging configuration that couldn't be mitigated. Derek's phone call at exactly 46 minutes past 7. His decision to override my recommendation at exactly 5 past 8. Sean shutting down the crane until Derek overrode him again. My formal pullback with the crew at 7:58. Every detail, every calculation, every moment of doubt, and every moment of certainty. I documented it all, every single detail. I filled out forms, I signed statements, I made copies of notes I'd taken. Because I wasn't trying to protect myself. I was trying to make sure that anyone investigating this disaster had the absolute truth. I was trying to build a record that couldn't be rewritten or reinterpreted or dismissed as the paranoia of one uptight safety officer. I was building evidence that decisions mattered, that timing mattered, that saying no and being heard mattered. The insurance adjusters were particularly interested in the 19-minute gap between my call to Derek and his callback. That gap was where Derek had made the phone calls that authorized the lift. That gap was where corporate pressure had overridden professional judgment. That gap was the difference between a prevented disaster and a $12 million loss. Derek disappeared for about 2 hours. I found out later he was in the office calling lawyers, building his own defense while the harbor was still settling. Probably dictating emails to his administrative assistant, probably rewording conversations in his head, probably trying to construct a narrative where the blame belonged somewhere else. But the witnesses were everywhere. Tommy had heard the phone conversation with Derek. Sean had documented the override in writing. The Port Authority had recorded timestamps on everything. There was no narrative that could survive when physics is involved. By noon, OSHA was on site. The federal government doesn't play around with industrial accidents, especially ones that happen at major ports and involve equipment failures that could have killed people. OSHA sends investigators, engineers, specialists. They document everything. They measure everything. They interview everyone. And they take what happened and they use it to understand how to prevent it from happening again. They arrived with clipboards and cameras and the kind of authority that comes from decades of watching industrial disasters and learning what went wrong. The lead OSHA investigator was a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen. She'd been investigating industrial accidents for 23 years. She knew what questions to ask. She knew which details mattered. She knew that the difference between a cautious professional and a liability was often just narrative control, and she wasn't interested in narratives. She was interested in facts. She spent 4 hours with me alone. 4 hours going through the timeline, going through my calculations, going through the reasoning behind each decision. She looked at my load calculations and compared them to what the Liebherr's engineers had calculated. She looked at the weather data from that morning. She looked at the maintenance records for the crane. She looked at Derek's training certifications and his previous job history. And slowly, methodically, she built a case that was airtight. The crane itself was fine. The rigging was adequate for the weight if the weight had actually been 280 tons. The Liebherr had been properly maintained. Everything about the system was correct except for the decision to operate it beyond its safety limits. It wasn't a system failure. It was a decision failure. My crew and I, we were the heroes of the story by that point, though hero feels like a weird word for just refusing to let someone get hurt. But that's how the other dock workers were treating us. The guys from other operations were giving us nods. Nobody was questioning our decision anymore. The universal logic of, we would have done the same thing, filled the waterfront. Sean Kilmer came over to me about 4 hours into the disaster response. His hands were shaking. I noticed his hands shaking. "Thanks for knowing what you were talking about," he said. "Thanks for listening," I said. That night I went home and didn't sleep. My wife, Catherine, knew something was wrong the second I walked through the door. I told her everything. She sat there, listening, and then she did what she does best. She reminded me that I'd done the right thing, that I'd saved lives, that whatever came next, I could hold my head up. She reminded me that some things are more important than jobs or bonuses or being liked by the people who write your paychecks. I didn't feel like I'd saved anything. I felt like I'd just prevented a disaster that shouldn't have happened in the first place. I felt like I'd done what anyone with training should have done, and the fact that it was remarkable told me something terrifying about how the system worked. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 full weeks of interviews, engineering analysis, detailed reconstruction of what happened, assessment of loads, assessment of equipment, assessment of procedures. OSHA brought in structural engineers from MIT. They brought in crane specialists from Germany. They flew in people who'd worked on the original Liebherr design. They brought in people who'd spent entire careers understanding why industrial systems fail and what the warning signs look like. They looked at the Liebherr with the same kind of attention surgeons give to a patient during open-heart surgery. They photographed every cable, every connection, every piece of the rigging. They took measurements of every weld, every bracket, every attachment point. They pulled the load from the harbor and examined the geometry of how it broke apart. The load came up in pieces, and those pieces told the story of how catastrophic failure doesn't happen all at once. It happens in sequence. The right cable fails first. Then the geometry of the load shifts. Then the left cable, under stress it was never designed to bear, fails in sympathy. And then physics takes over. They reconstructed what the Liebherr's operator, Sean Kilmer, would have felt in the controls. The subtle vibration that warned him something was wrong. The way the load distributed differently than it should have. The feedback from a machine that was trying to tell him to stop. They measured the angle of the boom at the moment of failure. They calculated the forces involved. They reconstructed the physics from the moment the right cable snapped to the moment the load hit water. 8.3 seconds. That's how long the disaster took. And what they found confirmed everything I'd said. The load was 285 tons, not 280. The center of gravity was exactly where I'd calculated it, down to the millimeter. The Liebherr's 300-ton capacity was inadequate for that load under those conditions. The rigging configuration wasn't wrong, but it was operating under impossible stress. Every cable bore loads that exceeded what the mathematics said it could bear. And most critically, Derek Massey had overridden a safety officer's recommendation and directed the operation to proceed despite documented safety concerns. The evidence was unambiguous. Derek had received the warning. Derek had chosen to proceed anyway. That last part was the key. That's what moved this from tragedy to negligence. That's what made it actionable. That last part was the thing that made this not just an accident, but potential negligence. Potential criminal negligence, depending on how the lawyers wanted to interpret it. Potentially manslaughter if someone had been standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Potentially a cemetery plot instead of a harbor bottom. 2 days into the OSHA investigation, Derek was suspended from duty. He went home, told his wife what had happened, probably tried to convince himself that this would blow over, that the blame would be distributed, that he wouldn't be the only one held responsible. But he would have known, deep down, that this wasn't going to blow over. He'd received a warning from a certified safety officer. He'd overridden that warning. And now $12 million was at the bottom of a harbor. 3 weeks in, once the investigation's preliminary findings were ready, he was fired. Not just from Chesapeake Marine. The company needed to distance itself from him immediately. They needed to show OSHA that the accident was a result of Derek's bad decision, not systemic failure. So they hung him out to dry. They fired him. They refused to give references. They made him radioactive within hours. He was blacklisted from pretty much every major port operation on the East Coast. People who'd worked with him for years stopped taking his calls. His references became toxic. When companies called Chesapeake Marine to ask about Derek, they got silence. Worse than silence. They got legally protected statements about his responsibility for the Baltimore disaster. The man was radioactive. He tried to get work at smaller operations, but the word had spread. A supervisor who overrode a safety officer. A supervisor who gambled with people's lives and lost. A supervisor who cost his company $15 million and nearly destroyed them. In the maritime industry, that's not just a failure. That's a mark that never goes away. The customer, the company whose load had gone to the bottom of the harbor, sued Chesapeake Marine for the full cost of the load, plus recovery operations, which ended up being about $15 million by the time they pulled the equipment off the harbor floor. Insurance covered most of it, but the deductible and the rate increases nearly sank the company. Chesapeake Marine went through a restructuring. New management came in, new safety protocols, new training, new equipment. The whole operation got rebuilt from the ground up with me brought in as Director of Safety, a promotion that came with a substantial raise and the explicit mandate to make sure that what happened to me never happened to anyone else at that company again. I was given the authority I should have had all along. The Federal Railroad Administration, or rather the version of their protocols that applied to port operations, changed training requirements after this accident. Derek's decision became a teaching moment in the industry. In rigor certification programs all over the country, they now teach the story of the Baltimore Harbor Lift as an example of what happens when someone with authority overrides someone with expertise. My name isn't in the training materials, but my situation is. Somewhere, right now, younger riggers are learning about load calculations and center of gravity problems by studying what happened that morning. The disaster became a lesson. The failure became a teacher. Derek never worked in maritime logistics again. I don't know what he ended up doing. I never looked. Part of me felt bad for him. He was under pressure, under timeline, under financial incentives. He wasn't a villain. He was just a guy who made the wrong choice in a moment when the wrong choice was available to him. But I couldn't feel too bad, because his willingness to gamble with other people's lives cost a company $15 million, nearly destroyed an operation, set back the entire industry's understanding of load tolerance, and created a scar in the lives of everyone who was there that morning. 6 months after the incident, I was contacted by a lawyer. Not Derek's lawyer, my lawyer. Chesapeake Marine wanted to formalize my employment with a contract that included liability protection, basically saying that my decision to pull the crew that morning was not only justified, but was exactly what company policy required. They were covering my ass legally, but more than that, they were affirming that I'd done the right thing. They were affirming that listening to expertise was good business. They were affirming that I wasn't paranoid or cautious or difficult. I was right. I signed the contract. And I didn't feel vindicated so much as relieved. The weight of wondering if I'd made the wrong call, if I'd been too cautious, if I'd let my paranoia override good judgment. All of that lifted. The doubt dissolved. For the first time in 3 weeks, I could breathe fully. But here's the thing nobody ever tells you about being right in a situation like this. Being right doesn't feel as good as you think it will. Because the load still sank. Because Derek still lost his career. Because I still have to look at that harbor and remember the moment when something I'd warned about became an inevitability. Because Sean Kilmer told me, months later, that he had nightmares about that cable snapping. He'd said no to Derek, but Derek had overridden him anyway. And Sean's brain was replaying that moment over and over, trying to find the version where things went differently. Because Scott's wife did have their baby, but Scott was dealing with a stress disorder that came from being that close to a disaster. He flinched at loud noises for a year after that. We were lucky. That's the bottom line. We were lucky that nobody was directly under that load when it fell. We were lucky that nobody was on a vessel in the immediate vicinity. We were lucky that the load didn't swing and hit the dock. We were lucky that what could have been a multi-fatality catastrophe was only a $15 million loss and some significant psychological scarring. Luck. The thing you can't calculate. The thing that determines whether you're a cautious professional or a paranoid obsessive. And luck, I've learned, is just the gap between preparation and disaster. 2 years after the incident, I was invited to speak at a maritime safety conference in Baltimore. The organizers wanted me to talk about load calculations and center of gravity assessments. I agreed. When I got there, I realized the real reason they'd invited me. They wanted the story. They wanted people to hear what it actually sounds like when someone with authority overrides someone with expertise. I talked about load calculations. I talked about center of gravity, about the mathematics of distributed weight, about the physics that doesn't care about timelines. I talked about the 19-minute phone call where a decision was made. I talked about Sean Kilmer's willingness to shut down a crane even when it meant his job. I talked about my crew standing on that dock, watching, bearing witness to what happened next. I talked about what it feels like to say no to someone who has authority over your paycheck. I talked about the cost of being right and the greater cost of being wrong and staying silent. I talked about the harbor and what it looks like when a $12 million problem sinks into deep water. And afterward, as I was packing up my materials, a young rigger came up to me. Couldn't have been more than 25, maybe even younger. He had that look in his eyes of someone carrying something. He told me that he'd been working on a job 6 months earlier where someone had overridden a safety concern. A supervisor telling him to proceed despite a flagged risk. He said he'd thought about me in the harbor, and he'd walked away from that job, just like we did. He'd gathered his crew and he'd left. I asked him if anything had happened. 3 weeks later, he said, they had an accident on that same site. Not as bad as yours, but bad enough. Crane failed, load shifted, somebody got hurt. Not killed, but hurt bad enough that they won't be able to do this work anymore. And I've been thinking about it every day since. If I'd still been there, if I hadn't walked away, if I hadn't believed the story you told about Baltimore Harbor, it could have been me. That could have been my arm. He didn't ask me for anything. He just wanted me to know that the decision had mattered, that refusing to play the game had consequences that extended into the future, into situations I'd never know about, into lives I'd never meet. That's when I understood the real value of what happened. It wasn't about vindication. It wasn't about being right. It wasn't about promotion or contracts or authority or anything that happened to me. It was about understanding that expertise means something, that experience means something, that the person who's actually trained to recognize dangerous situations has to be able to say no, and that no has to be respected. That when you say no and people listen, the consequences ripple forward in ways you can't measure or predict. Every time I see that harbor now, I don't just see the place where a $12 million crane sank. I see the place where someone listened to expertise, where a younger guy shut down a crane because a senior guy said it wasn't safe, where a decision to walk away prevented something worse from happening, where the system worked exactly as it should have after I refused to let it break. I see the dock where we stood, watching. I remember the feel of that morning, the pre-dawn cold, the smell of diesel and salt water, the sense of standing at the edge of something. I see Derek's face when he realized that authority wasn't going to matter. I see Sean's hands on the controls, feeling the vibration that told him something was wrong. I see the loading dock where 4 good men made a choice and held it. I see the harbor water closing over a load that should never have been lifted, and I feel the weight of luck, the knowledge that we were lucky, and that luck is just another word for the gap between the training we had and the disaster we prevented. And I think about that young rigger who walked away, and I think about all the ones I'll never meet, all the moments where one person's willingness to say no changed someone's future. That's the story people don't tell in the business schools. That's the story that doesn't make the quarterly reports. But it's the story that matters most, because it's the story that explains why some people go home at the end of the day and other people don't. I'm still working. I'm still in the industry. I still oversee major lifts at Chesapeake Marine, but now I've got the authority to pull operations if I see a problem. I don't have to ask permission anymore. I just have to be right. And after what happened in Baltimore Harbor, I know I can be. That morning when Derek told me to get back to work, when he threatened my job, when he overrode my professional judgment, that was his choice. A bad choice. A choice that cost him everything. But my choice came before his. My choice was to trust my training, to trust my experience, to trust the 19 years I'd spent learning exactly what happens when equipment fails, to trust that expertise isn't paranoia, and my choice saved lives. Maybe not directly, maybe not obviously, but somewhere, someone who would have been under that load if I hadn't walked away is alive because I did. Somewhere, a kid who didn't exist yet is alive because their parent didn't get crushed on a Baltimore dock. That's a debt I can't repay. That's a consequence I can't measure. That's the part that actually matters. That's the part that matters most. Not the vindication, not the promotion, not the fact that I was right and Derek was wrong. Just the fact that when it came down to the moment of choosing between a paycheck and someone's life, I chose correctly. And I'd make that same choice again without hesitation, every single time, for the rest of my life. That's the story.